Hello and welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your host, Buddy Sotelo Esquire. And this week we have not just one of the people that I think is very instrumental in me becoming a professional wrestling manager, but also a guy I really just enjoy reading everything that you post and all your witnesses. Shane Atrocity, Shane Dynasty, one of the greatest managers in the history of Northern California. Shane, thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the kind words. I really appreciate it. I'm just happy to be here. Still be here.
Yes, I know. You've been through a lot. And we'd like to, in the hour that we have today, I'd like to find out all about what you've been through and your career as both not just a manager, but as a wrestler and also as a successful tattoo artist. So why don't you start off by telling us how you got involved in wrestling to begin with?
Well, I was born in 1972. I grew up in the 80s. Between the year 1980 and 1990 was the year 8 to 18 for me. So that was I grew up in that era that was considered that golden era of pro wrestling, the Hulkamania years. I wasn't a huge, I was a WWF fan, but I was really into the NWA at the time. I got WTBS and I just thought a lot of the old Mid-Atlantic NWA wrestlers reminded me of, I have a lot of family on the East Coast and they got a little wild. So the NWA was believable to me because I had family members that were like that. There was an uncle that was kind of the Ric Flair and there was an uncle that was kind of the Dusty. And so I could relate to that much more than kind of even in the early 80s, cartoonic antics of the WWF. But what really drew me to wrestling as a fan, I'm a horror movie guy. I always have been. I was into monsters, started out with dinosaurs, got into the classic Universal monsters, then got into horror movies.
Ray Harryhausen.
Yeah, I love Ray Harryhausen. I managed to see a double feature of Seventh Voyage of Sinbad and Jason of the Argonauts in a movie theater in San Francisco when I was 9, and it changed my life. But I used to collect horror magazines and monster magazines, and I distinctly remember on a rack at Walden Books next to the Fangoria with Godzilla on the cover was one of the old Abner mags with Bruiser Brody and Abdul the Butcher wrestling in a barbed wire match in Puerto Rico. And they both had the proverbial crimson mask. And it was 100%, it was more terrifying and graphic than anything in the Fangoria sitting next to it. And I was immediately like, oh, wow, what is this? And I've been exposed to Buzz Sawyer on WTBS was one of the first memories I have because of the furry boots and he was insane. So I was a fan. I was a fan from kind of the golden era of pro wrestling. I got into it kind of, as a mark, not as somebody with an athletic background that wanted to get into pro wrestling, but somebody who had an interest in pro wrestling that wanted to get into pro wrestling. And I knew a guy who I worked with, me and a couple other guys that we worked with, knew a guy who had trained at Bay Area Wrestling. Do you remember Bay Area Wrestling?
Oh, yes. I do remember Bay Area Wrestling, yes.
Woody Farmer,
absolutely.
Yeah. And he had trained with Woody Farmer for about a year and a half and done a couple of matches, but hadn't gone far with them. But because we had bought a boxing ring, he was willing to train us. So he had about a year and a half experience in the business, training under Woody Farmer. And he was like, yeah, I know you guys, so I'll teach you how to wrestle. And his training consisted of him beating us up pretty severely 3 times a week for about a year and a half. Because apparently that was his training, was getting beat up pretty severely 3 times a week for a year and a half. And so that's what he did. He didn't teach us a whole lot of psychology. He didn't teach us a lot of, taught us how to protect ourselves by beating us up and then going, well, if you don't want that to happen again, here's how you cover. And we kind of started putting on they were backyard shows. We draw maybe 50, 60 people to backyard shows in a old antiques warehouse and a turkey farm in Napa County.
Wow.
And it was me and maybe 8 to 10 other guys playing multiple characters so that we could put on a full card.
So you've always lived in the you've always lived in the East County? You've always lived
I grew up in the Bay Area.
Oh, okay.
And I moved up to the Sierra foothills about 20 years ago, but I grew up in the Bay Area. So I grew up in like San Rafael, Marin County, San Francisco. And then
I'm in Novato right now, by the way.
Yeah, we're generally from the same hood in that area. Terra Linda was my stomping grounds.
But you would hardly call this area like a wrestling hotspot, you know?
Absolutely not. But there's like me, you, AJ Kirsch is from the area. There's a handful of NorCal talent because NorCal's such a big area that when you take into account, like, you know, how spread out it is, of course, in a business where you have a couple of hundred people on the indie scene in this area, you're going to get 2 or 3 from any regional area, no matter what. But yeah, we did shows and we got a little bit of coverage on a local sports segment, a local cable show. And oddly enough, Roland Alexander saw that little segment and invited me and 3 other guys that I was working with to come up and visit his relatively new Pacific Coast Sports facility that he had in Hayward, California. And we thought we were hot shit. And we rolled in there thinking we're going to blow this guy's pants off and he's going to be so impressed and offer us this big money contract immediately because, you know, we were delusional. And Roland smartened us up real quick. He really he's like, do you know about this? Do you know about this? And he started using a lot of kayfabe lingo on us that, you know, I knew maybe about 33% of it, but like there was a lot of it that was just completely over my head. And it was such a humbling experience because at that moment I realized I knew absolutely nothing about this business. Like I thought I had kind of smartened up because I had access to like, you know, the Wrestling Observer and shit like that. And I kind of thought I knew the way wrestling worked. And that was my first experience going where you have these moments of clarity where you go, oh shit, I absolutely know nothing. I'm completely delusional and I have to start from scratch. And that was the first of several times where I felt that way in the professional wrestling industry. But Roland, you know, he did his pitch and he's like, this is what I charge, train you guys and train you professionally. And the 3 other guys that I was with had access to that money, but I did not. And so they signed up for the boot camp. And I unfortunately could not sign up for the boot camp. I did not have that financial means available to me. But Roland knew I was already part of this kind of crew that came up there, and I would drive up with them and kind of linger around a little bit. And when nobody was looking, when the trainers like Rick Thompson or Michael Modest like went out of the room or something like that, I would just get in the ring and do stuff real fast. And eventually, because I wouldn't go away, they inevitably decided they were going to use me to do something. And it started out doing camera work. And then we had an announcer, Ron Head. Do you remember Ron Head?
Absolutely. Love the guy.
Ron Head's great announcer, and he was such an enormous fan favorite in the APW Gym Wars building at the time. He was over more than a lot of the wrestlers were. And he decided to move to LA because he was going to start doing an announcing job for this upcoming promotion called XPW.
I remember.
And which meant, and it was an amicable leave, but he was going down to LA and APW was like, well, we need an announcer. And I looked like a flamboyant character because I was like kind of like a punk rock kid, but like, you know, they didn't want to make me a wrestler. I think they used me as a jobber one time. I wore a mask and I put over Rick Turner in a match, just like because they needed somebody to job out to him. I did that as a Great Tsunami one time, and then I was doing camera work for them. they decided they needed a new announcer because Ron Head wasn't there. And I had a good look. Raging Bull Manny Fernandez had just started working with Roland. And they were looking for a new announcer. And I distinctly remember being in the office, just listening in. And Manny Fernandez said, "This kid with the blue hair, he just looks interesting. Let him be the announcer." And I was a kid with the blue hair. So they made me the announcer. And at the same time they're doing this, I had somehow managed to finagle doing work for Johnny Legend. I don't know. Do you know a lot of Johnny Legend?
Yeah, but barely. He was getting out right when I got in.
Yeah. So Johnny Legend was a guy that like I kind of was believe it or not, I was a fan of. I was kind of a mark for the guy because he was into like horror movies and wrestling and a lot of the other shit that I was into. And he actually picked me out of a line at a show in San Francisco because I was big enough and said, "Hey, you look like a wrestler. Do you have wrestling gear in your car?" I said, "Yeah, I do." And he said, "Hey, you want to work tonight?" And I parlayed that into a 15-year run with Incredibly Strange Wrestling, just from getting picked out of the audience. So this is going on the same time that they're putting me in as an announcer at APW. And because I'm replacing Ron Head, who's a really popular guy, fans love him, I'm immediately a heel announcer. They fucking hate me, right? They just don't like me because I'm not Ron Head. And I have a confrontational personality. If somebody's going to come at me with like a negative reaction, I'm going to feed into that negative reaction. So I started feeding into this heel announcer gimmick. And I did that for a couple of months. And it was a very antagonistic relationship. I was doing my job. I was announcing people, and I wasn't being a heel towards like the talent. I was just healing it up with the fans. And I think that Roland and Manny realized that there had to be a payoff to that. Like you can't have somebody be an antagonistic heel and then not. What's the point of doing that if there's no payoff? You know, it's that whole thing of like, if you do something, it doesn't mean anything, then why'd you do it? Right. And I couldn't help that they were already being antagonistic with me. I was just playing into it. I saw an opportunity to get heat, so I just played into it. They realized that we have to pay this off somehow. And it was a Christmas chaos, I think 97, in the APW garage, where I think match 2 or 3, I was doing my announcing gimmick and I was talking a bunch of smack, and Vicious Vic Grimes, who had just debuted his younger brother, Lil Dick Grimes.
Which was Vinny, right?
Which was Vinny Massaro. And his first, he'd been a referee, but this was his first actual gimmick as a worker. And they came out and interrupted me during an announcement and had a bunch of rap presents, which were like a VCR and a metal stop sign and a golf club. And they just proceeded to beat the crap out of me. So that was a payoff. And I was cool with it because, like, you know, I was big ECW fan. I'm down with the hardcore stuff. Back then I was. I wanted to do it. And I knew that there had to be a payoff to me healing it up on the fans for month upon months. And it got over. And then it was like, well, where do we go from here? So they had Max Justice, who was a specimen. Max was he was big and strong.
I remember Max, definitely.
And he was so powerful. And at the time, he was still doing kind of the La Migra gimmick with Michael Modest.
Right.
But Modest had kind of gone off and done the natural one thing. So he was doing his own thing. And Max was such a specimen physically, but like, you know, no knock on him. It's the case with a lot of guys. He wasn't much of a talker.
Super nice guy. I really love Max.
Really great guy, but he wasn't, his promos weren't like setting the world on fire. And at that time they needed, like, again, Manny was booking at this point. I'm pretty sure Manny was still booking at this point. This was before they had their falling out, but Manny Fernandez was booking, and he was a believer in having a strong heel champion that could drop the title to faces and then win it back. And then drop the title to another face and then win it back. But if you're going to be a strong heel champion, you either have to be able to like cut fire promos, or you have to have somebody attached to you who can cut fire promos. And for whatever reason, they pegged me as that guy. I just gotten a lot of heat, just talking smack to the fans, not necessarily being a heel to baby faces, but just to the audience. But they knew I could garner heat. So they attached me to Max Justice. And we proceeded to have a 3-year run in APW with him holding the Universal Heavyweight title, I believe, 6 or 7 times. We drew massive heat. It was weird because the gimmick was, Max came out in the La Migra gimmick, he was like Border Patrol. And that drew a lot of, heel heat, especially when we do shows down in like Southern California or like obviously heavily, Latinx based populations. They fucking hated us. And I was always really careful that like I wanted to fit with Max, but I also didn't want to look like I was a Border Patrol agent because honestly, like personally, it made me kind of uncomfortable. So I adopted this almost like kind of a lot of black, the glasses, the baseball caps, a kind of paramilitary vibe, a very pseudo-fascist vibe, but not really like out in the open. I wasn't saying I'm law enforcement or this, that, or the other thing, but definitely it looked like the kind of guy who would, I don't know, by today's standards would probably be I don't know, you could probably say my character back then looks like a modern day QAnon conspiracy guy.
Interesting.
But it was really kind of, I was just healing it up really hard. And I've tried really careful to always mince my words and be really careful as not to, I never wanted it to be overtly racial based heat. I knew it was always going to kind of be that way because just the whole look was like a Border Patrol agent. And it kind of, I wasn't like 100% comfortable with it even back then. Because I know like times are different now. But even back then, I was kind of like, ugh, God, I feel like we can do better. It wasn't that it was like, it was just like, it felt cheap. It felt like cheap. And, but we had a good run. We had a 4-year run where, we were the top heel act in APW. And at the same
when you made the Shoot Club? Is that when you guys created the Shoot Club?
That was the next step after Shoot Club. Shoot Club came because at the same time I was doing that, I was still working for Incredibly Strange Wrestling. And we were running shows in San Francisco predominantly, but they went from like Transmission Theater to like the Trocadero to the Paradise Lounge to eventually we were doing shows at the Fillmore, which is a world famous concert venue in San Francisco. Bill Graham's venue in San Francisco.
I saw Fishbone there.
Yeah, I've seen a bunch of acts there before and since we did shows there at ISW. And one of the things that's truly like means so much to me is that if you go into the Fillmore today, pretty sure it's still open, they have a whole upper level that's just walls of posters from shows that have been there. And there's an Incredibly Strange Wrestling poster on that wall with my name on it, my character's name on it. That's a feather in my cap.
Nice.
So I'm working at ISW as a wrestler. That's kind of like my outlaw gig, As far as Roland's concerned, that's my outlaw mud show kind of gimmick. But I'm doing like managing at APW for Max, and then the whole Max Justice thing falls apart. Weird screw job ending where I end up like winning the title for Max, and I'm the Universal Heavyweight champion for like 2 weeks. There's 2 weeks where I was the APW champion, and you can look that up.
Yeah.
And then I lost it to Michael Modest in a dog collar match, which I thought was so overbooked because I was like still a manager. I'm a heel manager, and Michael Modest was the most over baby face in the company. And they still had to make it a dog collar match for him to beat me. That seems so completely unnecessary. But I thought we had a really good match, to be honest with you. It was pretty one-sided. He just beat the snot out of me. But that ended up the whole run with Max, and that's when the Shoot Club came, which consisted of Tony Jones, Frank Murdoch, later on Boom Boom Kamini. Chad Collier was a member for a hot minute. God,
I thought about Chad Collier in forever.
Yeah, he was there for a hot minute. And And that was kind of ahead of its time too, because our whole gimmick was that we were just legitimate shoot wrestlers. I was the voice of the group, but like Tony Jones, legitimate shoot background. Frank Murdoch, you know, he was doing the hardcore, like old school heel, cowboy gimmick. Boom Boom just being Boom Boom. And they were all bald, and we had these T-shirts that said Shoot Club on the front, and on the back it said stiff as FU or F apostrophe CK. And I printed those up, and oh man, those sold like hotcakes. I sold those out everywhere I went, because that was back in the day where you couldn't really say stuff like that on T-shirts. And there were a couple times when we did high school shows in like Pacifica, where they were like, you got to pull those shirts down now, or else this show's gonna get pulled. And Roland got really upset with me because
of course, as I remember the Pacifica audiences, they were probably the most profane and most violent audiences that I ever performed for.
Shirts more than anybody, and I wasn't allowed to sell them because it was a high school show. But they loved that. We were, even though we were the heels in Pacifica, like we were super over because, we were the heels, and they were a very pro heel crowd. I loved working Pacifica. It was one of my favorite venues to work during APW.
It's the only place I ever got stuff actually thrown at me, though. That's the only venue where people actually threw shit at me.
Oh, you sweet summer child. I've been hit with so many more things than like Pacifica was easy. When I started working for Incredibly Strange Wrestling, when we were doing small bars in San Francisco, they would still serve beer in a bottle. And we'd get hit with bottles and hard plastic ashtrays. And that's why, one of the things that people remember about Incredibly Strange Wrestling is the tortillas. The reason the tortillas came into play and the promotion started handing out tortillas to the audience to throw into the ring, not only was it a really incredible visual, but they would throw tortillas from the ashtrays, and that was softer. It didn't hurt as bad. It got in your gear, and it smelled awful, and it was there, but at least it wasn't like getting hit in the head with a glass bottle, And that's not the worst. I can tell you a horrible, horrible story from being in Switzerland.
That's what we're here for.
We were in, so we're doing a show. Incredibly Strange Wrestling was on tour with a kind of punk rock, BMX, skateboarding, pro wrestling European festival that traveled all over the continent for about 3 months. And one of our stops was in a Olympic ice hockey stadium in Switzerland. And usually, because this was an outdoor, it was like a Warp Tour kind of setup. So it was multiple stages for the most part. And because usually they were outdoor venues, people would work their way around. So they weren't committed to just one act at any time. There was usually 2 stage shows going at any time, BMX over here, wrestling over here. You didn't have the whole audience focused on one stage. But because this show was inside this hockey arena, it was like 16,000 people. And they would only show one act at a time. So they would show like a band, and then they would show like the skateboarders, and then another band, and then some BMX guys, and then a band, and then the wrestling. And this crowd did not, they did not know pro wrestling. They did not know what they were looking at. We went out there and I don't know what they were expecting, but I garnered pretty quickly that what they saw was grown men in Halloween costumes kind of pretending to fight each other. And they kind of just looked at it like, I don't know how I'm supposed to react to this. And I was in match number 2. And the first match just really fell flat because the audience just did not know what to do at all. They're just like, I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't think WWF was in Switzerland. I don't think they had much of a local scene, whatever reason, this audience just did not know what they're looking at. And I'm in match 2, and I'm doing my heel gimmick under a hood. El Gran Fangoria was the gimmick I was doing. And I go out there and I want to get a reaction out of this crowd. So I just start to really heal it up. I start to do really heelish stuff. And I'm working with a guy who I had told previously because he kind of hurt some people before. And so he was stuck working with me because I told him, like, I'm not gonna let you hurt me. You just do what I tell you to do, right? So I knew I could just kind of make him work from underneath for me, like really, really put the boots to him and everything. And he would just take it, and it would allow me to really like do a lot of very heelish behaviors to the audience. So I'd like knock him down, and then I would like, taunt the audience and hold the ropes open for them to get in the ring and like beckon for them to get in the ring. Like, you want a piece of me? Which was a mistake because they saw that as a legitimate challenge. They didn't see this as a pro wrestler taunt. They saw this as a guy going, you want to fight? So I had people trying to climb over the barricade. And the security was a local security that didn't really care. They were there to watch the show. I think they were volunteers more than they were like getting paid to do a job. So when this first guy started climbing over the barricade, they didn't fucking do anything. And I don't think it's a good thing, but I was trained old school. Like I see, like, especially if you stick your head through the ropes, like you're fair game. But also, like, if I see, even before you're going to get into the ring, if I see the chance that you're coming at me aggressively, and nobody else is going to stop you, I'm going to try to cut you off at the pass, So I see this one guy climb over the barrier, and he had like rage in his eyes, like he was mad at me, and I don't think this is the right thing to do in any way, shape, or form. But I panicked and I immediately rolled out of the ring. And as he's climbing over the barricade, I punched him in the face as hard as I could to just get him off of the barrier because they weren't doing anything. And this guy was going to come at me one way or the other. And I wasn't going to wait for him to stick his head through the ropes. I was just going to cut him off the pass. And he kind of plunged backwards. And then the rest of the audience saw that and they got pissed off. Like they were immediately mad because now I had hit this guy. And like 4 or 5 of them started climbing over the barriers, right? And then the security started to like get up and try to hold them back, but at that point they were outnumbered. There wasn't as many security as there were people, and so I'm like, I don't know what to do here. I got to finish my match still. So I immediately rolled into the ring, grabbed the guy, hit a pile driver, covered him 1, 2, 3, and walked out of the ring. They rang the bell and I left. And as I'm leaving the ring, I'm just getting peppered with bottles. I'm getting like anything they can get their hands on. Somebody threw a chair at me. I got hit with. I'm pretty sure I got hit with a cup full of spit that somebody had been. It just landed on me. But I booked it and I ran to the showers because we had a shower room at this venue. And I immediately ran to the showers. I didn't stick around to watch the match after me. And I didn't have to because not 2 minutes later, the guys that went on after me were already in the shower room. And they were covered with all kinds of what was apparently bodily fluids. Apparently, I had started a little bit of a kind of like semi-riot at that point. And then the next act after me, keep in mind, we're in Switzerland in 2002, was U.S. Steel, Ulysses Samson Steel. Dave Bell came out in his Uncle Sam gimmick with American flag. And after I had already riled up the crowd, and he came up doing this very pro-American gimmick that, this was after 9/11 and we didn't have a very good image outside of the U.S. He apparently got peppered with some poop.
Oh boy.
Which I can't understand how you could do that in a public setting. you could just like, you know what, I am so mad that I am just going to take my pants down and throw this at somebody. But apparently that's what happened, because he came running into that locker room squealing like a little girl, jumping into the shower to wash it off. So especially in Europe, you know, you hear stories of like, you know, guys talking about working in Mexico and getting hit with like cups of urine and stuff. And man, outside the US, that stuff happens. I hate to admit it, but it really does happen. More often than not, you just hope you have a shower.
Well, it's like, I think it extends from the soccer type stuff, you know.
It does. It does. I think we should all count our blessings that we're not getting hit with like breeze blocks and batteries.
Yeah,
it could
or the lit pennies or the lit coins.
It could be so much worse. If you look at like the football scene in like Great Britain and the way their hooligans get down, pro wrestling looks soft in comparison.
Wow. So then talk about your transition from APW. The next time I saw you was at California Championship Wrestling when we had you work for us, and you invented the Reno Scum, which is something that must be, you know, a feather in your cap.
So there was the Reno Boys, right? There was the Reno Boys, which was like, you know, Luster the Legend, Adam Thornstowe, you know, Big Paul Isadora, Choopy. You know, there's the Reno Boys, and they were like a crew. You know, they would all come down from Reno and work Northern California, and I was good friends with like me and Luster and Adam in particular were really good friends at the time. And in SPW, I started. It kind of evolved from I had a crew, because my whole gimmick has always been like I'm a talker. You know, my whole gimmick is I am privileged and honored to have an ability to make complete strangers hate me within about 30 seconds of meeting me, if I want them to. I can be equally charming, but if I want to make a room of a couple hundred people absolutely dislike me, I have a remarkable skill at doing that. So in professional wrestling, my job has always been as a leader of men. I'm like a boss level guy. I'm not like the hardest guy to beat, but you got to go through a bunch of guys to get to me. And I'm the guy you really want to beat because I'm the one that talked all the shit. So in SPW, because I had moved from the Bay Area up into Auburn, up in the foothills, I was working for SPW down in Sacramento. I had a crew called The Rejected. It was based on a movie called Suburbia about a bunch of punk rock youth. And so I had this crew. It's a very kind of punk rock, kind of outcast vibe. And that grew into the Reno Scum. And the Reno Scum was originally, it was like, you know, me, Adam Thornstowe, Luster the Legend, Paul Isadora. And I was really going for like, I wanted us to be like a kind of punk rock Freebirds was what I was shooting for, right? In that like, and this sounds weird to a particular extent, because like you have to really know the Freebirds to understand my mentality on this. If you just know the Freebirds by what you were presented, then you probably don't understand this analogy. But from my presentation, I saw us the Freebirds in that like Luster was the Terry Gordy because he was the big hoss, right? He was the hoss who could go. He could go with anybody. And this is where it gets weird, because to me, Adam Thornstowe, who most people say he's the Michael Hayes, right? Now he's the Buddy Roberts because he was the workhorse. In my mind, in the Freebirds, Buddy Roberts was the guy who, like, he did all the hard lifting, right? Because like Terry Gordy was a hoss, he couldn't take the fucking bumps, you couldn't put the heat on him. Michael Hayes was like, he was a talker guy, so like you couldn't put him out. At the end of the day, if anybody had to put anybody over, it was Buddy. If anybody had to do a workhorse match, a long-term workhorse match with somebody, he was fucking Buddy. But he's never gotten the respect he deserves in the Freebirds. Everybody always says Michael Hayes, Terry Gordy, Jimmy Jam, whatever that is. But at the end of the day, like Buddy, even though he was a later addition to that crew, he kind of like he really stayed the Freebirds. And Adam was that guy. And then I was kind of like the Michael Hayes because I wasn't much of a worker. Michael Hayes has never been much of a worker, no matter what anybody says. Crap worker, can't bump worth shit. But good talker, very charismatic. That's me. I'm a good talker, very charismatic, but I'm not particularly athletic. Same with Michael Hayes, and I will stand by that statement. And we did that for a while, and we worked all over Northern California. We had a good 3-year run as the Reno Scum. And then when they went to Impact, we kind of that's when they were just like strictly a tag team, you know. And I I think they got misused in Impact personally. I think they had a lot more potential.
Did Impact ever want to bring you on board?
No,
I'm
I don't think
surprised.
they had big enough plans. You know, Impact. I've got a lot of friends that have worked through Impact, and it's not a really structured promotion from 1 minute to the next. You know, it's very, even if you look at its programming now, it looks like it's kind of promotion that's constantly reinventing itself every 5 minutes almost. And like every time you tune in, you're like, oh, this is the direction we're going now. And then you tune in the next week and you're like, oh no, we're going in a completely different direction now. And like, I don't have a problem with it, but like, yeah, no, I was never, the only time I was reached out to it was because they were, I designed the Reno Scum logo, the brass knuckles and the switchblade. That was my artwork. And they reached out to me on licensing the artwork for like t-shirts and stuff like that. And I was willing to give it to him at what I thought was a relatively reasonable rate, but I didn't hear back from him after that. Even though I did see that image pop up on the back projection on their TV shows, they still used it. They just didn't want to pay me for it. So I'm not mad. I made that gimmick to help my friends out. You know, I drew that design, that logo for my friends. I gave that to them. When Adam said, hey man, they want to know how much you would charge to license this out. And I was like, you know, ask for a couple $100. And then I never heard back. You know, I wasn't mad when I saw that image pop up behind them on the screen. I wish it had done more to get them over. But I think they got booked. I think they got buried at that promotion.
So I'm gonna throw out some names to you, and I want to just get what your thoughts are. You know, say whatever you want to say about them. Mark Smith.
Bison was the sweetest guy in the world. One of the nicest dudes in the world. Almost too kind for the wrestling business. You know, I didn't know him. You know, I'm sure, you know, when he went down and he worked in Puerto Rico and he fucking, you know, he did those tours of Japan. I remember when he first got back from his first tour of Japan, because we talked about that a lot. And because I was really I wanted to know everything about it. And he was like, you'd love it over there. And he was just such a sweet guy. He was almost like, you know, unfortunately, and you know this as well as I do, in that time period in like particularly Northern California indie wrestling, it was, you know, I'm just being 100% honest. It was almost like a toxically masculine kind of culture, and it wasn't cool to show any kind of like sensitivity or kindness really. And Mark just was, anyways. He was just like a good person. And you know, it's funny because somebody asked me because you know, I don't know if you remember, but when he first debuted, he was the Big Buffalo Mark Smith.
Right.
I hate the way that sounds. And then it was. Do you remember Cav Manning?
No, I don't.
So Cav Manning was a manager in APW for a short time, and me and him were sitting around going like, how much we hated the name Big Buffalo, because it just sounded. I mean, it sounded like a load of bullshit, sort of. I didn't like the way it sounded. It just didn't roll off my tongue. And we came up with, because of Bison Canamura, we came up with the idea of calling him Bison Smith.
Yes. Okay. How about Roland Alexander?
I have two wrestling dads. I have two, not mentors, because I have a lot of mentors, but I have two wrestling dads, two guys that were like from a generation previous me that kind of raised me in this business. And one's Johnny Legend and the other's Roland Alexander. And, you know, man, like I always had a love-hate relationship with Roland. Me and Roland butted heads so many times. So many times me and Roland butted heads. And he said some of the harshest criticism to me in my career. But he was sometimes he was too harsh, and here's the thing about Roland, he was a carny, and at the end of the day, he was working every conversation he had with you, he was working you in his direction one way or the other. And sometimes it was effective, and half the time it was utter fucking bullshit. I'm going to tell you a story about Roland Alexander. So I'm like 2 years into my run in APW, and I get this, and like I told you, I was still working at ISW, and I got a phone call from him saying, "Hey, Michael Modest is pissed at you." And I go, "Why?" And he goes, and this is Roland, because he doesn't say I'm pissed at you. He goes, "Michael Modest is pissed at you." He goes, because he heard that you're trying to poach our talent to go work at ISW. And I go, "Who told you that?" And he told me who said it. And I said, "Well, Roland, you tell Mike to call me directly and not have you call me. And I'll explain to him how that wrestler actually reached out to me to book him, not the other way around. And if he's got a problem with it, then we can get together and we can talk it out." And I was heated because I knew Roland was working me, right? Because that's not what happened. This guy reached out to me. I knew he was working me. And so I was sitting around waiting, and I was really worried that I was going to get a phone call from Michael Modest, because, Roland would work you, but Modest could chew you out. Modest could seriously chew you out and make you fucking, oh, man. Ugh. But so I'm waiting for this phone call from Michael Modest, and it doesn't come, but I get a phone call from Roland 15 minutes later going, "Yep, well, we talked it out. We got it all worked out. Your story checks out. You're right about that. Hey, so listen, we're doing this angle where we're going to take the Universal Heavyweight title off of Max, and we're going to do this weird angle where, like, you end up winning it from him." So because I stood up for myself in that situation, because I stood up and I said, "Hey, you know what? This is BS, and I'm if this is not the way it happened, but if you think this is the way it happened, you want to talk to me about it, I'm willing to stand up for myself about this one." That's how I ended up winning the APW Universal Heavyweight title. I don't think that would have happened if I hadn't stood up for myself.
Nice.
So Roland was a good guy, and he taught me a lot in this business, but he was a carny at heart through and through.
Boom Boom Kamimi.
Again, Boom Boom. I love the guy to death. I love the guy to death, but again, he was also. Sometimes I was such good friends with Aaron, and then other times, especially if we were in front of the boys, he would switch on that kind of vibe where he, super critical, tough guy mode all the time, and it was weird because sometimes we'd be on and off with him because me and him were super close. We'd room together when we were on the road, which was hard because he had sleep apnea and he snored like a rhinoceros, but he was my homie and I was willing to tolerate that because, we both smoked a lot of weed and he was cool. But, at the same time, Boom Boom, when he got around the boys, because I was, in APW, at least I was just a manager. And as far as Roland was concerned, managers were always just window dressing. We were never the big draw. We were just secondary. He would flex up on me to kind of getting good with the boys. And, not to talk ill of the dead in any way, shape, or form, but, I love him to death and I miss him. But that always hurt my feelings.
Interesting. That is very interesting. Okay, Buddy Sotelo.
I love Buddy Sotelo. Buddy Sotelo was one of those throwback old school managers that, like, in a lot of ways, I envied Buddy Sotelo because he could be that kind of keyed down manager that my energy, my ADHD and my energy levels don't allow me to ever be that keyed down. Like Buddy Sotelo fell more into the mode of the J.J. Dillon, the Jim Cornette, the smart, business-minded manager, right? And I was always going for I wasn't always going for it. I think it's just part of my personality, and I think your wrestling personality is your personality turned up. But like Grand Wizard, Bobby Heenan, got to take some bumps, got to be the center of attention, got to draw heat from not just the baby faces, not just the audience, but I'm kind of at the same time drawing heat with my charge. You know what I mean? Like, that manager, the one that, like, the guys that he managed, kind of, they didn't like him. I was that guy. I feel like in charge has always liked you. I don't think they liked me that much that most of the time. I feel like Max wanted to powerbomb me on my head half the time.
We had our moments, especially when I was managing Boom Boom. He didn't.
Yeah, I bet.
Boom Boom didn't love me all the time. But I want to say that in the time that I joined APW, nobody took their time out to tell me what to do and how to be a good manager as much as you did. You gave me the attention that a lot of guys just didn't have to, like, take me aside and give me advice. And I'm always grateful to you for that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you saying that, because that's what I'm trying to do still to this day, is I'm trying to take that time to give a lot of the younger talent in wrestling, to give them wisdom that I'm not talking smack on anybody, but a lot of time, always, no matter what, stuff's going to fall under the radar. Details aren't going to get covered in the curriculum. And a lot of times guys go through a quote unquote training system and they think they've been smartened up. They know how to work the spots. They know how to work the holds and stuff like that. But the hardest part about this business, no matter what anybody says, isn't the physicality. It's the psychology of the business. And people always say wrestling psychology, wrestling psychology. It's not even wrestling psychology. It's just psychology, period. It's performer psychology. It's understanding how to, whether it's acting or singing or any form of art or any kind of performance that you're doing, making it believable, engageable, and palatable to the audience, right? Essentially, pro wrestling is telling a story that they know is just a story. Everybody's smart now. Nobody's that clueless. But if you do it right, they will suspend their disbelief long enough to go, I don't care. I'm just along for the ride. It's like when you go to a movie, you know the Avengers is not real. You know Thanos is not real. But you like the way these characters are portrayed. You like the logic of the story. You like the flow of it. You become engaged in it. Professional wrestling works the same way. And that's where the psychology comes into place. So, like, doing those spots, doing those wrestling spots are great. But, like, I've always said, what the part about pro wrestling I really, really don't care about is?
What?
I don't care about wrestling. I really don't care about the wrestling holds. I mean, it's cool, but I've seen it all 1,000 times. It's very rarely that I've seen something that is really like, oh, I've never fucking seen that again. Every now and then it'll be a super high spot, but it's very rare. I don't care about that because that's the meat. That's the meat in the flesh. But I'm interested in the bones, the structure of the animal. You know what I mean? Why are they fighting? What is their motivation? Why should I care? Why should I care one against the next? How many times have I seen a match where there's two guys and they're both incredible performers doing such a good job and they're just doing this beautiful dance and all their spots are crisp and on point, but I just don't care who wins. I really don't care. Like, I'm going to probably applaud either way, and it's just so beautiful, it's so crisp, but I don't care. I really don't give a damn who wins. And that's the art form of professional wrestling, is creating a mentality of, my job, because I'm a heel, is to create a mentality of, God, I hate this guy so much, I want him to lose. I can't wait to watch him lose. And if I give them that, then they have this cathartic feeling of, oh, thank God he lost. And if I don't give them that, they go, oh, why didn't he lose? And they go, gosh, maybe next time he'll lose. So I'll watch next time to see him lose. And you can only extend that for so long. That's why I lose 80% of my matches. But, that's the other thing.
I've always found you to be the smartest mind that I've ever met in professional wrestling because of what you just said. And because you really understand that. You reach into people's minds and you grab their mind, you squeeze it like a sponge, and you get everything out of people's minds, including all that hatred. I always admired that. I was like, man, if I could ever get people to hate me the way that they hate Shane Dynasty, I will die a happy man.
No, it's So I mean, it's a slippery slope. You know, you can go too far, but it's not just pro wrestling. People always go like, who are your influences? And I'm like, obviously my biggest influences in pro wrestling are guys like Roddy Piper and Bobby Heenan, who also have that ability to just get into your emotions and just kind of tug on those strings a little bit, right? But my influences go outside that. You know who I look at? I look at guys like Jim Jones, like Reverend Jim Jones from the Jonestown's massacre. I look at some of the videos of Charles Manson. I look at guys like Martin Luther King. I look at people like John F. Kennedy. I look at good orators, people who can get in front of an audience and regardless of their message are able to engage people and draw people in and take a crowd of people and just make them all go, why is he doing it? It's cadence, it's delivery, it's saying those right buzzwords that kind of get under people's skins a little bit. But one of the biggest ones is a tool that I use that Jake the Snake Roberts taught me. And he said, what you do is you look out into that audience and you pick one person out. And I'm your side.
You taught me this, and you were so right. And I've been telling other professional wrestling managers the same thing. Find the pockets of hate and cultivate that.
Just get in on them. Just like even if you can't see them, just find that one person that doesn't like you and just hone in on them and make them feel uncomfortable and awkward by just staring at them like a creepy guy, right? And cut your promo on that one person because it spreads like a virus amongst everybody else. And they all look at that guy and they go, why is he picking on this guy right here? Like, I hope he doesn't pick on me. And they start slightly moving away from that person, And it's a flock mentality. You know what I mean? It's like if you get a bunch of birds together and you pick on this one bird, all the other birds are going to get away from that bird. You know what I mean? Because they're freaked out. I don't want to be that guy. And then you can pick out another one, and they're like, "Oh shit, I'm not safe. I got to move over here." And
Andy Kaufman did that so well.
Another one of my biggest influences because he was the best when it comes to, and this is something that isn't utilized enough. He was a troll. He would troll the audience. He wasn't just drawing like heel heat. He was drawing go away heat and milking the go away heat. He made you hate him so much because he wouldn't stop. He wouldn't stop beating up women. He wouldn't stop reading a poem by Shakespeare. He wouldn't stop just singing the theme song to Mighty Mouse, and that got under people's skin. And that's psychology, It works in pro wrestling, but it works in a lot of other things too.
Wow. So we're running close to the end of the hour. First of all, I could talk to you for like 100 hours. Like
I said, man, like you're like, I hope we can fill out an hour. And I'm like, that's not going to be a problem.
Yeah, no, I didn't think that was. But why don't you, first of all, talk a little bit about your tattooing business, because I'd like to be able to promote that a little bit.
I appreciate that.
So why don't you tell everyone about what you do there?
I've been tattooing for a little over 20 years. I work at a shop in Sacramento, California called 13 Mag Tattoo. That's a tattoo shop as well as a tattoo museum. We have a kind of a lounge area with a billiards table and a bunch of like kind of displays and stuff like that. Really cool shop. I do a lot of like very like cartoony kind of fusion artwork. But really whatever comes down the path. I fancy myself a pretty versatile artist. I've been doing that for a little over 20 years and still going strong. It's one of my passions besides pro wrestling. I would say those two things are probably my biggest artistic outlets. And I think I get equal creative fulfillment from both of them.
When you said you were getting tattoos done on your back last week, I was like, where does he have room? I thought you were.
Back, I have a full Ouija board on my back that I'm doing that. The artist who started it, Ouija board has like every letter in the alphabet and all the numbers and the yes and the no and the goodbye, hello. Somehow, and it was weird because it got by me and I still have the original printout and it was on there, but somehow he did not put the Q in there. There was no Q. So we covered it up with, we ended up putting the planchette over that area. So I'm in the process of kind of reworking a little bit, but like, oh yeah, I got room still. I got room.
And
I'm gonna cut this out eventually.
what's your favorite tattoo that you've ever done? I've always wanted to ask you that.
I've ever done on anybody.
Yeah.
So my current partner right now, she has some of my favorite tattoos on her, because she's got a very similar sense of aesthetic as I do. So like, she's got a Sailor Moon on the back of her thigh, but it's a Shibari kind of bondage Sailor Moon, and she's got the Green Goblin on the outside of her arm, but it's not like the Green Goblin. It's the actual Maximum Overdrive, the Stephen King movie.
Yes.
Yeah, it's that Green Goblin off of the toy truck, off of that one in particular. She's got like a couple of Captain Spaulding tattoos from House of a Thousand Corpses. I did a Terrifier one of Art the Clown on her. So we have a very similar kind of aesthetic. So I get to do a lot of my favorite tattoos on her, luckily.
Very good. Very good. So what's the future of Shane Dynasty or Shane Atrocity?
Well, I turned 50 last year. And
wow.
Yeah, that's a milestone. That's a big age to turn. And I've been having, I'm still wrestling. I'm still working for like
I don't know how you are, man. I don't know how you've got so many bumps and bruises and mileage, and you know when you get 5-0, things start really hurting.
They do, but I look, you know what? I've been doing this for a long time. And if there's one thing I've learned, two things I've learned, it's psychology and how to take care of myself and how to work safe. I work smart, not hard. And I'm the first person to say that. Some of my biggest idols are guys I look at that, like, Dusty Rhodes. Dusty could still work up until the end. And it wasn't a lot, but he could do the Dusty Rhodes shtick. And that's all it takes. If you got a good shtick, you got a good gimmick, you got something that everybody knows and eats up, you can go out there and shake your booty and fucking wave that atomic elbow around and do your shtick, and you can get by just fine, as long as you work smart. So that's what I'm doing. I've got skin cancer on my right hand, and that's something that I'm working treatment on. But again, my biggest role in professional wrestling is to talk a good game and have somebody else clean up the mess I make. So I'm still doing that. I'm still out there making a bunch of people hate me and the people that are associated with me by, connection. And then they go and have the match, and then we move on to the next one. And at this point, what I do in professional wrestling is I create reasons for people to fight. I tell stories that the crowd can understand, that creates motivation beyond he is a good guy and he is a bad guy and they fight, which is kind of every match and boring. But you can, believe it or not, no matter what anybody says, you can do creative, simple, understandable booking for every single match on a card that goes beyond him heel, him face, them fight. They can all have stories. And it's the one thing that I will give Vince Russo credit for, is that during the Attitude Era, he managed to write stories for literally everybody up and down the card, good or bad. He wrote stories for everybody up and down the card. And I'm a firm believer that can be done. If you're not a lazy booker, if you do your goddamn job, which is booker, write your stories so that there is a reason for everything that happens in the ring. And that's what I facilitate.
Wow. Shane, this has just been an amazing interview. Why don't you throw out your social media links if people want to get a hold of you, and if they want to find out about the tattoo studio, if you don't mind throwing those out?
I'm on all the usual links. I'm on Facebook, Shane Atrocity. I'm on Twitter because
By the way, when did you change from Shane Dynasty to Atrocity?
Well, Atrocity character grew out of Hood Slam, and it's the most over the top, but also the most true to my legit personality.
You're almost the Joker, aren't you?
I'm definitely a super villain. I'm a cross between the Joker and Skeletor, and a little bit of I would say maybe a little bit of Rick from Rick and Morty, all wrapped up in one. And Yeah, it's a very over the top character, but I like over the top characters. I think I do my best work with over the top characters because I can, like I always said, like wearing a mask. If I can do as good facial expressions as I do wearing a mask, then the guys that don't have the handicap of a hood have absolutely no excuse for not being able to do what I do. And if I can make a completely unrealistic cartoonish character like Doc Atrocity resonate with the fans, and he's an absolute cartoon character, then there's no excuse why your character can't get over as well.
Nice.
I literally handicap myself at every turn and still knock it out of the park just to prove a point.
You do.
But that Doc Atrocity is my Hood Slam character that I really has become part of who I am. You know Odorous Urungus from Guar?
No, I don't. But I do know Guar. I do know Guar.
The lead singer who passed away a couple of years ago. That's really kind of the biggest influence of Doc Atrocity.
Nice.
But I'm that on Facebook. Doc Atrocity on Instagram. There's Doc Atrocity Tattoos, which is my tattoo page, and then there's just good old Doc Atrocity, which is the wrestling side of it. And then I'm Shane Dynasty because I signed up a long time ago on Twitter.
Cool. I can't say how much I appreciated this interview. And when I think of I've done almost 150 shows, and this has been one of the most interesting. And I've known you for years and decades. You told me stuff I've never known before about you, and I really appreciate that because you are a fountain of knowledge that is untapped when it comes to your knowledge of psychology and wrestling and all this stuff. I just love this interview. And
let's get somebody to tap it. What do you say?
Yeah, I had to wrestle you down.
Knowledge. Yeah,
I had to fight to get you on this show, but I'm so glad I got you.
Hard man to pin down, but we can do it again.
I would love that. And, I'll be at one of these Hood Slam shows one of these days, so we'll go out and party afterwards.
Absolutely should, because I tell you what, Hood Slam is like one of my biggest problems with wrestling is that, like, in indie wrestling especially, is like, one guy will run a show on Saturday, and then another guy will run a show on Sunday, and they'll be 5 miles away from each other, and they pretend like they don't exist. And that's always annoyed me. Hood Slam can get away with that because it's a completely different parallel universe. The moment you walk through that door, you're no longer on Earth Prime. You're in like a kind of bizarro world at that point.
Nice. So just where you belong. Absolutely. Exactly. Absolutely. Shane, thank you so much for doing the show today. And we'll be back. I'll have you on again in the future, too, because there's a million other things I wanted to ask you that I didn't get to today because I just wanted to hear all your stories. Anyway, thanks so much, and we'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone. We'll see y'all next week. Goodbye.
Goodbye.